We're going to look at monopolistic competition. And basically, in perfect competition, you have a homogeneous product, but in monopolistic competition, the product gets slightly differentiated. So if you do raise your price, you're not going to lose all the demand like you would in perfect, but it's quite highly elastic, so you will lose some of the demand. And it's a situation which still has lots of firms, so it's very similar to perfect in that it's got lots of firms, but you've got some market power now, and you've got some choice over the price that you set because you've got a downward sloping demand curve. And so therefore it's any firm is a price maker in this situation. You have a very small share of the market because, again, there's loads of firms, and so you're not going to have one big dominant firm, but they are independent of the others, and that's quite important for later. In other words, they don't have to worry about what others are doing. There is complete freedom of entry into and exit from the industry, exactly like perfect competition, and there's perfect knowledge, which is exactly like perfect competition. And this is the diagram that you get. So you get your downward sloping AR curve, your MR curve, which is sloping downwards at half that rate. You have your marginal cost curve cutting the average cost curve at the lowest point here. So first thing that you always do is you say, well, what is the profit maximizing quantity in the market? And it's going to be where MC hits MR, and so you draw your point in here as the quantity profit maximizing. Then once you set your quantity, you say, well, okay, how much can I get rid? How much do I have to charge to get rid of all that quantity? And here's your demand curve. And how much is the average cost of that? And so this will be your price in the market. This will be your average cost. And so therefore profit, supernormal profit, remember, because it's above normal. Normal is in the cost curve, is going to give you that profit there, supernormal profit. But because of freedom of entry and exit, what's going to happen is that other firms are going to enter the market because they can see the supernormal profit being earned, and so they enter the market. And unlike perfect, where the supply curve in the market would rise and therefore the price would fall, in this situation what we argue is that each individual firm, because this is the quantity of any one firm down here, each individual firm is going to receive a slightly lower demand in the market. So in other words, the supernormal attracts the new firms, and the demand curve is going to shift inwards, and the marginal revenue curve is also going to shift inwards. So that's shown here, and what will happen in a minute is that these curves will move in, and they'll keep moving in until the point where there is no supernormal profit. So you have to draw this as your long run equilibrium, no supernormal profit, where the price equals the average total cost in the market. And that's quite an important diagram to be able to draw accurately, and I'll show you in a minute how you draw that. Okay, so here we go. How do I draw? Hints on drawing the demand curve. We'll follow the steps. The first thing I always do is draw in this ATC and make it quite here. This is the key point here. That mustn't be too flat. It's got to have a curve to it here. Then you draw in this AR at a tangent to that point there. So that's the key point because there's no supernormal profit being made. Then you drop your equilibrium down from this point here. Then at that point you can draw in the marginal revenue because you know that's about halfway across the axis here is the marginal revenue, twice the steepness of that average revenue curve. So now you've drawn your average revenue and you know the marginal cost cuts the lowest point. You then draw in the marginal cost curve here because you've got a point at the lowest ATC and that point there to make sure that you go through. And that's the way that you draw your long run equilibrium in the market. And I'd really recommend that if you are in the exam doing this, you simply draw a short run and then this long run and explain how you get there. Then you identify the fact that there is no supernormal profit where AR equals ATC. Okay. So how does that compare with perfect competition? Well, these are the 5 ways in which we're going to actually look at it. Okay. So the first one is that you start here and you say, well, look, we're at a point here and we're definitely not at the point here. We're not at where we were in perfect competition, because perfect competition, we always had this productive efficiency. We're at the lowest point of the ATC curve because we literally had a flat demand curve. So the one thing to say about it is that that's what would happen in perfect competition. There's your situation in monopolistic competition, and so therefore in monopolistic you are not productively efficient. The price is higher than you would be in perfect competition, and the output is lower. So those are the key things to say. Firms are not producing it productive, and the price is higher, quantity is lower. Spare capacity is the next thing that we need to look at, and the spare capacity is simply defined as the profit maximizing point, wherever it happens to be, which is here, MCMR, and how that differs from what it would be if you had the productive efficiency point, lowest ATC. So that gap there between that and that is known as the spare capacity in monopolistic. And the argument is that you've got this spare capacity because you haven't gone on and reached this lowest ATC. Okay. What about allocate efficiency? Well, remember, the price is up here in this market and the marginal cost is here. And so that cannot be allocatively efficient. You've gone to a point where you are allocatively inefficient because the price, the benefit, the marginal benefit received by the consumers is going to be greater than the marginal cost of production. And so you can, some people do, just fill in that gap there, between there and there. But that's a welfare loss triangle, if you like. But you can just simply state that you are not allocatively efficient in monopolistic competition. And the argument here is that the more differentiated the products are, which is a good thing for consumers, but that leads to greater spare capacity and higher prices. So if you have a slightly differentiated product, you have quite an elastic demand curve here. But if you have a more differentiated, then the demand curve slips around, and so your equilibrium would be up here. So the more differentiated your product is, you move on to this demand curve here, and so you have a higher price and more spare capacity. Remember the distance between here and this new equilibrium here. So I'll put it in for you. The more differentiated the product is, the further you go away from the ATC, the lowest ATC, greater spare capacity, and the higher the price. So from the consumer's point of view, they're paying for a more differentiated product, if you like. So you have to decide then the variety of the products and how much they want to differentiate. So there's a big argument that in monopolistic, the firms will, differentiate their product and develop them. And basically, if you can differentiate them enough, then they're able to enjoy some supernormal profit in the long run. In other words, that you're moving away really from monopolistic to being able to keep some of that profit because you're going to find that there's brand loyalty and things like that. So one way to do that is through this non-price competition. In other words, you make your products more and more different. The PED becomes more inelastic, so you can raise your price a bit more and not lose too much demand. And the more inelastic, you get this brand loyalty as well coming through, and then that acts as a barrier to entry for other firms. So what happens over time is that as firms make more product differentiation, you're going to find that there's increased in brand loyalty. And advertising is another way that this brand loyalty comes through, and you can always split it between informative and persuasive advertising, which is a useful concept. And the right advertising is going to raise your demand but also add to costs, but that's going to be worth it if the extra revenue is greater than the extra cost. The existence of this high advertising can also act as a barrier to entry, and it's a sunk cost. It's a cost that if you went into this industry and it didn't work out, you would lose all that advertising. You can't sell that advertising to someone else, and so it's a barrier to exit as well. So what we're arguing here is that the advertising gets you brand loyalty, makes the PD inelastic, but also that you're going to be able to keep some of that profit because you've got these barriers to entry and exit. Although some will argue that this informative advertising is quite good because it means the consumers are better able to judge the benefit they get from the good. In other words, if there's information failure, then you can argue that informative advertising is a good idea because it tells you how much real benefit you get from the good, whereas persuasive advertising is not a good thing. So that's quite useful when you're doing your analysis and evaluation. So hopefully that's a helpful video for you on monopolistic competition.